Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam, and in this video I want to talk about some of the winter damage that I'm seeing in my area. I'm in Zone 7B in the southeast United States, and it was well below normal this winter, and still not over. It's still in mid-February right now as I'm recording this, so we could have conceivably some more cold nights to come, but probably the worst of it, obviously, the better be over at this point. In my area, we actually had 200 consecutive hours below freezing, which was a record by far. It shattered the old record. I actually made a road trip down to the coast to Wilmington, North Carolina, and drove the South Carolina coast over the course of a week a few weeks back. And I was told in Charleston, South Carolina, they had gone 80 hours below freezing, which for many of you, obviously in the Northeast and other parts of the country, that's absolutely nothing. But for a place like Charleston, South Carolina, that prides itself on growing subtropical plants and along the coast there to attract lots of visitors, there's a substantial amount of damage. Things like oleanders that they are pushing the envelopes on. A lot of the palms, the native palms in South Carolina, don't seem to be harmed all that much, but the sable palms and a lot of the other tropicals, they're growing. And I just saw a lot of damage, basically from Myrtle Beach down to Charleston, South Carolina, where they try, like I say, where they're trying to grow those tropical things. There's a lot of damage. So I would imagine that inland as well, into Zone 8 and 9, where the temperatures were, where they had probably similar 80 hours to 100 hours below freezing, which was really not normal in any way. In those areas, the plants that they have in those spaces definitely have taken some damage. In my area, I'm actually seeing less than I thought I would, which is good. There's damage. I've noticed that in areas that are protected with a tree canopy or the houses are closer together, I don't see as much damage. The plants that I'm seeing damage on are definitely out in open space where the wind or sun had some sort of impact on them during the winter. I want to show you right here over my shoulder. I think you'll be able to see that yellowing on those recurve ligustrum right here. That yellowing is actually a result of, this is south facing, and the sun comes up over my house here enough to actually have burned the side of these. The ground actually froze solid here, and it wasn't able to put any water up into the top of this plant. So this is actually like a sunburn, like you went outside and your skin was very dry and you were more apt to be burned that way. Most of the time you see this type of damage on the west or north side of a plant from the wind, where the ground froze and then the wind did this damage. But this was actually the sun that scalded this side of the plant, and I'm seeing this a lot. And this was just a situation where the plant wasn't able to get water up to the top. This leafy evergreen shrub of this size that has this minimal amount of damage, I'm gonna go across here in a couple weeks and take this yellow off so the sun can get in there. I'm gonna angle it back just a little bit so that the sun can really work its way into this plant, and it's gonna be no problem whatsoever. So if you're seeing any type of damage like that, any kind of little spot browning or yellowing, that kind of thing on large leafy evergreens, I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think you can cut it out or shear it off, and we're going to be fine on those types of things. The things that are really going to have a really hard time recovering are things, leafy evergreen shrubs that have browned completely out. And Loropetalum, I'm seeing in a lot of places where they're in open space, are really without leaves. And what I want you to do on those plants is practice some patience this spring. I think that most of those things will come back out. I just don't know where on the plant it's going to come back out. So rather than go out and get crazy and start cutting on it, let's wait until mid-April, maybe even the beginning of May. It may take a long time for some of these things. The roots may have been damaged as well. It may take a while to start getting some energy going in these plants. Let's find out where they're going to leaf out and then cut them back to that spot. So don't take the thing all the way down to the ground because it looks naked today, because it may be that a good portion of the woody stem is still alive. It may be that it comes out all the way at the top. We just don't know. You can actually scrape the bark on these things, and I'll show you an example of that right now. These are these Ralston viburnum that I had planted in November, and they had a lot of new growth on them, and I should have protected them this winter. That's completely my fault. It's not really a testament to how hardy these are. It's more, if they'd have been established at all, they would have had no problem, or if they would have gone through a natural dormancy, they would have been fine. But I can scrape on these with my thumb up near the top, and it's brown directly under that bark right there. But if I go back in here about halfway into this plant and I scrape with my nail right there, I can actually see that it's green under the bark right there. That's the part of the plant that's alive, and that's where I'm going to get growth from, is from about there downward in this plant. But I'm going to wait to see that growth first, and then I'm going to shear this plant off to that height later this spring, and that should be fine. I don't want to do it right now because sometimes cutting these leafy evergreen plants like this can actually encourage growth. And if I was to encourage growth here in mid-February, and then it took a second shot from another cold snap, that would almost certainly doom this plant. So I'm going to be really careful about that. The main thing I want to convey in this video is this spring is going to require a lot of patience. Just as an example of this, years and years ago, I worked at a garden center, and we had a 1-year guarantee on our plants. And April 15th every year, people would start the march in with their crepe myrtles that they thought were dead. Crepe myrtles leaf out very, very late. So even in a year that there was no damage whatsoever, people get very impatient. This year is going to be very different. If you have a young, spindly crepe myrtle that you planted last year, it's possible that thing has died to the ground, but it'll actually come back up from the roots in all likelihood. That could be well into May before you start seeing that kind of new growth. That's one plant that I know is almost certainly damaged. Not old, heavy wood crepe myrtles, but certainly any spindly ones that were planted within the last couple years. We're going to see some damage on those things in the southeast for sure. Been doing this a long time. Crepe myrtles are definitely at least partly damaged. And there's going to be lots of things like that. There'll be lots of grasses that we push the envelope on that likely won't come back this spring, or if they do, it may be into mid and late May before they recover very well. So even liriope, or monkey grass as some people call it, I've seen browned out. It's actually time to cut that back, so that's no big deal. You cut it off to the ground this time of year and it flushes right back out and has nice new growth, or you should be cutting it back every year. But I've actually never seen it completely browned out. I've seen it a little brown or a little tattered, and just kind of worse for wear, and that's why we always cut it back this time of year. But I've never seen it browned out like it is right now in my area, so that's an interesting thing to see. A lot of the camellias are in much better shape than I thought they were, and they're blooming right now. I really thought that those would have taken a hit. They did very, very well coming through this. I see hollies with more damage than camellias, so that, interesting. Not something I would have thought. So the main thing, like I say, is practicing patience this spring. If you have damage on plants, I would actually wait to do any pruning on those plants, except, like I just said, liriope would be one thing. I'd go ahead and clean it up now before you get that new growth on it later. I don't think it's going to die regardless. It's basically a weed. But everything else, I'm going to practice patience. I want to wait and see where they're going to come out from before I cut them. Crepe myrtles, like I say, if they're young and spindly and they end up getting killed to the ground, once you see them start to come up, you pick 3 or 4 that you want to keep, maybe 5 that you want to keep, cut everything else down to about 3 inches tall. Those will recover quickly by midsummer. If it's got any roots under it at all, they'll be back in bloom. They may only be 2 or 3 feet tall, but they'll be back in bloom that quickly. Those little evergreens that I showed you in that little demonstration about scraping the bark to find out where they're alive, they're leafing back out maybe later than they normally would, and I don't know where exactly yet, but I'll clean them up as soon as I see that happen. And that's just going to be true with anything that you have. These leafy evergreens, these big leafy evergreens like this, would be the exception to waiting. I don't want new growth coming on top of that yellow growth. I'd really like to get that off and clean it up. So if it's an old, established leafy evergreen plant that has some damage on it, and I see lots of those things. I've seen Nellie Stevens hollies that are 15 feet tall that have brown limbs in them all over the place, and go ahead and get those things out of there and allow some sunlight in as it warms up to get those things to fill out. We won't hurt those things by having pruned on them too early. Everything else, just leave it alone. Find out where it's going to come out from, prune it at that time, and good luck with everything. I'm going to go ahead and fertilize all of my things toward the end of February or early March. I'm going to mulch. I'm treating everything just like I normally would, and even if it looks like it may be dead or dying, I'm just going to treat it as I normally would, and except for pruning, and I'll wait and see, and hopefully they'll come out fine. So thank you very much for watching this video, and if it was helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel for future videos.